Okay, hello everyone. I made another video where I go over the solution to part A of the electromotors problem. Now I want to talk about part B, which is when we want to change the coefficient of the type 2 motor. So it says the present production schedule meets Electra's needs. However, because of competition, Electra may need to lower the price of its type 2 motor. What is the largest reduction that can be effected without changing the present production schedule? So all this is asking is, what's the biggest change we can make to that coefficient right there without changing the fact that we're producing X1, X2, and X3 motors, or type 1, type 2, type 3 motors. So I'm going to define a variable name that I'll call CX2 for the change in the X2 coefficient. And so I've done that, and that's this cell right here now. And then I put here in the formula for X2, instead of being negative 40, it's negative 40 plus CX2, that variable that I've defined. And you can see that when I plug in 1, now I get, instead of charging $40 per motor, we're only going to charge $39 per motor. And when that happens, you can see that the final tableau, it's basically unchanged. Let me go back and put in 0 and just stare at that final tableau. The only thing that changed was that entry right there. Okay. So the only issue with that is that now this is no longer a pivot. It's supposed to have zeros everywhere in its column, but it has a 1 there. But we can fix that. We can rectify that. And what you do is, instead of making this, instead of the previous formula, all we have to do is we just click on this first cell and say minus, and then we'll just subtract CX2. Okay. Sorry, we'll subtract CX2 times 835, because that's that pivot entry there. And when I do that and drag it across, you're going to see it's not going to change much. All it's going to change is that's going to become a 0. And then where are the other entries that are non-zero in that row? The only other entry that's non-zero in that row is this one. And so that changed this value as well. So let me go back and put in 0, and you can see the original optimal tableau had an 8.75 there. And when I plug in a 1, you get to 7.75. Everything else stays the same. Notice that still X1 is 370, X1 is 500, X2 is 500, and X3 is 375, and the slacks are the same. Everything stayed the same except for the sum of the coefficients in our 0 changed. In fact, the only one that really changed was that one. And so if I start increasing the change, right, if I start decreasing the price from 40 to 38, or from 40 to 36, the only thing that changes is that slack is going down. And still, this is an optimal tableau. Still, our production schedule is the same. We're getting a little less profit because we're charging less money for our type 2 motor, but that's the only change to the problem so far. But once I increase this, or decrease the price by $8.75, so instead of charging $40, I'm now charging $31.25, then S3 is equal to 0. And this is still optimal. But if I increase it past that, then this S3 is going to become negative. So like if I plug in 9, all of a sudden now this is negative, and this tells me that this tableau is no longer optimal, and I'll have to go back and redo the problem, okay, to get the optimal mix. So that's the nice thing about sensitivity analysis for objective coefficients, is as long as your tableau still has no negative values in its 0 row, then there's nothing that we have to do. We just get the same answer. It's just gonna be a slightly smaller profit. But when we get a negative value, that tells us this isn't optimal, and so we have to go back and redo the whole algorithm again. So the answer to part B is that we can decrease the price from $40 down to $31.25, and our production schedule is still unchanged. It just leads to a slightly smaller profit. And if you put the same problem into Torah, it'll tell you exactly that. If you plug the problem in and you ask for the optimal solution using just the final solution, it'll tell you that, what does this say? I don't know if I have the whole thing. It'll tell us that the optimal solution is 59,375, and it tells us that the minimum objective coefficient for X2 is $31.25. That's exactly 40 minus $8.75. And it also tells us that if we could increase the price, we could increase it indefinitely and would still keep the same objective coefficient. Okay, so in my next video, I'll explain what this row is telling us, that perhaps right now we're charging $30 and we're not using Type 4 motors. But what this is telling us is that if we increase the price to $37.50, then all of a sudden it would become beneficial for us to use the Type 4 motor. So let's see, how does that work? Let me just put this back to 0, and now we'll go back to our optimal solution. And now I'm going to copy this to a new sheet, just so I can keep things a little cleaner. All right, and now I'm going to delete all of that if I can. It's not letting me. Why can't I delete that? There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty clean. There's an error here just because when I copy the formulas down, I copied certain rows and then there's a different formula here, but that's not important right now. Okay, so now the question for part C asks us, currently motor 4 is not produced. By how much should its price be increased to be included in the production? Okay, so that's part C. And so now what we want to do is we just want to define a variable here that I'll call CX4. I can show you how to define a variable again. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the cell right below it and say define name, and it's already there. Okay, so you hit OK. And so now I'll plug in 1 there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to redefine this formula to be -30 and then minus CX4. Okay, and so now you can see that if I increase CX4 to 1, then the price goes up to $31. And does anything else change? It looks like the only thing that's changing is this entry right there. It changes from $7.50 to $6.50. Okay, and so now when will it actually change the fact that this is an optimal tableau? So you can see that these are all positive values in the 0 row. And as I'm increasing this, the only thing that's changing is that one variable is getting smaller. And if I get to 7.5, then I get to 0. And that's exactly when the production schedule will change. If I get to 8, if I increase it past that, then I get a negative value here, and this tells me that I need to change my production schedule. I'll add X4 to the production schedule here. Okay, so that is it. That is how you find the sensitivity analysis of the objective coefficients. You can plug it into Tor and it will tell you automatically, or you can use Excel and you just have to change the coefficients and look for what changes in the 0 row. And as long as everything's positive, nothing changes. If you get a negative value in your optimal tableau, then you need to rerun the problem. Okay, thank you for your time.